Thank you all very much. So in addition to being a postdoc here at RuCCS, I am also a linguist by trade. And my research really centers on syntax, or the structure of language. Now, syntax has really been fundamental to cognitive science really since the earliest days. And studying syntax offers us a lot of insight into the cognitive machinery that builds up the rich language we're able to use, really the rules of grammar as we often know them, right? But studying syntax also can give us really nice clues, insights into non-linguistic domains of cognition, all of the thoughts and experiences that language touches upon. And it's really this angle that my work focuses on. Using a mix of experimental methods and cross-linguistic comparison, I ask what the structure of language can tell us about the way that we mentally model the world around us. And really my work these days has been focused mainly on events. How we think about events in the world, how we talk about events, and the relationship between the two. So to give you an example, a lot of my ongoing research studies events through the lens of pronoun choice. And in particular, I mean the choice between personal pronouns like her and reflexive pronouns like herself. Now, this choice, the study of pronoun choice, has traditionally been treated within syntactic binding theory. And indeed, there are a lot of places where syntax really seems to be calling the shots. So for instance, if I wanted to describe an action like this, you might say, well, Shannon pinched herself. You couldn't say Shannon pinched her. Conversely, if Preston were to come up here, and if he were to pinch me, you'd have to say Preston pinched her. You couldn't say Preston pinched herself to convey the same thing. So these are cases where the rules of grammar, where syntax really is playing the defining role. But think about another situation. Maybe if I were to do something like this, right? How would you describe that? Would you say Shannon set the notebook next to her, or Shannon set the notebook next to herself? Here it's a little bit fuzzier, right? And in fact, this has been a big issue within binding theory for a long time, trying to figure out what is actually driving people's choices in these exact cases. So I use experimental methods to try to untangle the web of factors that drive people to prefer one pronoun form or the other. And it turns out that a big part of what determines what people prefer is how they're thinking about the event they're describing, and in particular, how they're thinking about the participants in that event. So for instance, whether or not the person is responsible for the location in this locative relation, like next to, whether or not they're affected by the location. Both of those are going to have a large impact on whether they would prefer the reflexive or the personal pronoun. And it turns out this isn't true just in English. In fact, ongoing work with a graduate student in Rutgers Linguistics has shown that we find a really similar pattern in Chinese as well, where the preference between reflexive and personal pronoun forms in locative prepositional phrases really depends on how we're thinking about event roles. So this one little thing, this one place, this one choice between pronoun forms, in fact gives us a lot of insight in the way people think about events. So along with research on pronoun choice, I'm also really interested in clausal complementation, thinking about how we build up a really complex event descriptions in the way that we're thinking about events in the world, and how those can be bundled up in natural language. So to give you another example, think about the difference between saying, I forgot to do my homework, where that homework didn't get done, versus I forgot that I did my homework, where good for you, you've succeeded in doing the task. A huge difference coming down to the way that we're structurally expressing the event of doing homework. Now, in all of the work that I do, I am really interested, again, in using experimental methods to try to tease apart these fuzzy places, to dig deeper into how cognition is shaping our linguistic behavior. And I'm really interested in looking across languages. On the one hand, looking across languages gives us a feel for all of the richness that we see in human language, the variety of ways that we can talk about the world. But fundamentally as well, once we start looking across language, that's where we can see what we all have in common. When those patterns start to emerge, we can see what's universal to the way that we think about events and the world more generally. And we can see what's really at the core of human cognition. That is, what it is that makes us human in the first place. So that's my work in a nutshell.
Okay, y'all, she set the bar high. Good. I was like, whoa, she's so good. Okay, so we're going, this is, actually, we did it in alphabetical order, but you'll see that there's like a segue, a really nice segue. So if we're going from locative expressions and thinking to spatial thinking. See what we did there? All right, so next up is Carol.
Hello, everyone. I'm Carol, and good job, Shannon. I'm studying something that is hard to be expressed by language. I'm studying spatial information. Now let's consider this daily scenario where you navigate between two locations, two familiar locations. Like you go from your lab, office, to your favorite restaurant, or your home. Like when you navigate between these two locations, when you go from location A to B, compared to going back from B to A, do you use the same route in both directions? I see some shakes. A lot of shakes, or not. Interestingly, often people take different routes in one direction than on the return route. So it's really asymmetry in these route choices. But why is that? Why it's the same route, why in different directions people pick different ones? Could it be related to the views or scenes you perceive in different directions, the perspective you take? In other words, how does your visual perception contribute to your spatial reasoning and decision making? And when we're in this kind of immersive surroundings, our perception is not just about vision. How do our multisensory inputs like smells, touch, body movements, sounds collaborate in this process? And human beings are not zombies. We are not just triggered by some immediate sensory input. It's also based on our memory and prior knowledge. But the issue is it triggers even more questions, like if we do have a cognitive maps in our mind, in our memory, what forms does it take? It's really like mind palace, like Sherlock Holmes has, or it's more like paper map with a top-down view, or it's more like a network of associations connecting a bunch of numerous first-person snapshots. To understand how people memorize and reason about spatial context or spatial information can also help us understand how these spatial information serve as a scaffold to help us to understand the other events and things happening in this kind of space. Like how do we memorize the critical events and our important encounters, how we learn different materials in different environments. And in these modern societies, how we sense the space has also been shaped by technology like Zoom, like the GPS, mixed realities, or even in the near future, the self-driving cars. How this modern technology change how we sense the space and how we understand the information happening in different environments. More specifically, thinking that when we are driving, how much mental process is offloaded to GPS? Does over-reliance on GPS compromise our sense of direction? Can we improve, enhance our sense of direction using these technologies? Even beyond these kind of perceptual or cognitive factors, how do emotional and motivational dispositions play a role here? Some people may say I pick different routes just because sometimes I'm under time pressures. But what about the other stressors, like your chronic stress level, or evacuating due to fires or earthquakes? If you think about this naturalistic task more closely or in depth, you will realize people we are not just navigate by ourselves. We also, more often we navigate with someone else. So how this social interaction play a role here? This kind of tradition, collective navigation is a tradition dates back to our hunter and gatherer as ancestors. How do diverse individuals make route choices collectively? So if you think about these scenarios more specifically, you'll realize you can probably think about a lot of scenarios where you kind of argue against someone about which is the right direction or the route to take in road trips. As a 3D creature living in this 3D environment, we keep consistently, intensively processing the spatial information, memorize it, reason about it, and act upon it. As a spatial cognition researchers, thinking diving into the misery of the misery of human minds through the lens of spatial intelligence is a fascinating journey for me. But I hope for those of you who are not specifically thinking about spatial intelligence, I hope that examine your current interest and your knowledge in spatial context, like no matter it's perception, language, decision-making, consciousness. If you put your research questions in the spatial context, it may kind of spark a fresh perspective. And I hope you enjoy the perspective from spatial cognition researcher, and thank you for your attention today.
Okay, so I want to make sure that the online people are engaged. So if you want to jump into the chat area, Zoom audience, and put a couple of comments to cheer on these postdocs, we'll convey it so we know you're not sleeping behind the screen there. All right, so we're moving from how we think about navigation and space to what it feels like to think. Yeah, exactly. All right, Preston, you're up.
All right. I work on phenomenal consciousness. Phenomenally conscious mental states are mental states for which there's something it's like for the subject to be in them. Now, philosophers and cognitive scientists have traditionally thought that phenomenal consciousness is limited to the sensory or the perceptual. So, the bright blue experience I have of looking up at the sky on a clear blue day, a clear day. The aural experience of birdsong I might hear out my window. These are paradigmatic instances of phenomenal consciousness. In my work, I argue that we need a broader notion of phenomenal consciousness, one that includes things like cognitive states, like judgments, thoughts, wonderings, entertainings, and so on. And I argue that we need this broader notion of consciousness for three different reasons. First, it can explain and elucidate the intentional content of thoughts, that is, what our thoughts are about. It can explain and elucidate the role of cognition in our lives as welfare subjects. So this is an ethical dimension to my work. And we also need this broader notion of consciousness because it currently separates us from machines, right? And so maybe I'll talk about these three strands of my work in a bit more detail. So first, on the intentionality of thought. Here's a thought I had the other day. My relationship with my newborn son changes how I view my relationship with my parents. That's a thought I had. There was something it was like to have that thought. There's a question, could I really be said to have that thought, the thought with that particular content, had there not been any phenomenal character at all? Now, some argue that you could account for the phenomenology of that thought just in terms of the accompanying inner speech or visual mental imagery. But I argue that aphantasia, the phenomenon of aphantasia, can provide a counterexample to my opponents who like this option. So aphantasic subjects are subjects that report having little to no visual or auditory mental imagery, and yet it still seems like they're having conscious thoughts. So I argue that this fun phenomenon of aphantasia, maybe some of you have heard of this, can provide a counterexample to my opponents on this score. Now, on the value of cognition in our lives as welfare subjects, we are beings for whom things can go better or worse. Just a fact about what it is to be a human being. What explains this? Many are attracted to the idea that consciousness is a necessary ingredient for being a welfare subject. Why is it permissible, if it's permissible, for me to throw this across the room? But it's impermissible to throw my son across the room? A plausible answer is that my son and not the eraser is conscious. And I argue that this broader notion of consciousness, cognitive consciousness, can play a role here. forgive me for giving a thought experiment. Philosophers love thought experiments. Suppose you're at a dinner party with good friends, enjoying good food, good conversation. When halfway through the dinner party, you're suddenly cognitively zombified. You still retain your sensory experience, your sensory phenomenology. You can taste the food, you can enjoy the ambient lighting of the restaurant. But you lose your cognitive experiences. You can no longer understand language, comprehend jokes, or have sort of reflective thoughts that might pass before you. I have the intuition, that I hope you do too, that there's something drastically gone wrong here for your life. Your life has gone worse. And now, what explains that intuition? You might think that just the lack of cognitive experiences themselves results in you going down in welfare. That's not the story I like. The story I like is that without cognitive experience, the range of objects that we can be pleased by and desire is drastically narrowed. Okay, so that's the ethics strand of my work. And finally, on artificial intelligence, if consciousness is critical for human thought and human well-being, then the question of whether artificial intelligence systems can think, or if they can be welfare subjects, turns on whether or not they can be conscious. And because it's, at least right now, very, very unlikely that large language models and other AI systems are conscious, I argue that AI ethicists should prioritize the issues that affect conscious beings, namely us, right? And so we shouldn't be so worried about things like the singularity and AI sentience. There are like real issues, algorithmic bias, the automation of labor, that are here and now, and we sort of don't be distracted by the threat of the singularity and things like this. So yeah, that's my research. Thanks for listening.
Okay, so we can think about a lot of things. We can also believe a lot of things. All right, next up is Joseph.
Hi, everyone. So 70 years ago, if I were to ask a group of people interested in the mind what they were doing at an event like this, they might say something about their histories of being rewarded and punished for being in this room or for attending RuCCS events. But nowadays, it's become at least a little bit respectable to say something about the beliefs that we have about this event taking place right now in this location. Maybe beliefs about the absence of deadlines that are urgent on our calendars. And to say something like, well, it's our beliefs that drove us to be here today. And I'm interested in the cognitive science of beliefs, ranging from really simple beliefs like our beliefs that we're currently in the room right now, to complex beliefs like our estimates of who's going to win the next presidential election. And what I find really interesting about beliefs is that they're where everything in the mind comes together. We form beliefs based on perceptions and by talking to other people. Beliefs are used to make inferences and to reason with. Beliefs enter into our decisions and they guide our actions. And so beliefs give me this really broad view of all of cognitive science. But actually, that's really the boring reason to be interested in belief. Here's the interesting reason. What is going on with flat earthers and anti-vaxxers? Why do people believe weird things? And there are a lot of common explanations along the lines of other people. It's almost always other people. Other people are irrational, or other people believe things because they want them to be true rather than they're actually true. Or other people believe things that are useful and not what the evidence supports. And I don't think these explanations work very well. And to see this, suppose that I asked you if I offered you $1 million, could you believe right now, truly believe, that the Earth is flat? Just try to imagine, can you turn some knob in your mind? And so it'd be very useful for you to believe that the Earth is flat if you got $1 million out of it. And you might want to very much, but I don't think that you can believe at will. And so these explanations kind of don't work. And so my explanation for weird beliefs goes back to all of those cognitive processes involved in belief. And while it's not the case that we can choose what we believe, we can direct some other cognitive processes at will. So if I incentivized you to go search for evidence of a flat Earth, you could absolutely do that, even if it would end up watching some sketchy videos on YouTube. Or you could try to construct some arguments for flat Earth, maybe try to argue away apparent evidence of a round Earth, like that there are these plane trajectories that certainly seem to go around the world. Or you could try to come up with memories that support a belief in flat Earth, right? So maybe you might think about how most of the time when we walk around, I mean, the ground seems pretty flat, so that might work. And so you can, in fact, direct some of these cognitive processes, even if you can't fully believe at will.
Okay, so adults are not the only ones that think about things and believe things. In fact, kids do too. And they can think and believe some pretty weird things. All right, so Xian's going to tell us about that.
Okay. So, hello everyone, I'm Xuyan. I'm a postdoc at Linguistics. So I am an acquisitionist working on language development. So I, as a second language learner, was first interested in how adults can acquire a second language or third language efficiently. So I suppose most of you guys have experience of learning a second language. So now try to recall what kind of factors really make your learning process smooth, you can succeed in learning a second language. Maybe you think you have really good memory, you have good processing, or you have really strong knowledge of your first language, or you think you're good at time management, so you can force yourself learning for 5 hours a day or something. So, but then one day realize, wait, our little human creatures could learn such a complex human language within a shorter period of time and without efforts. So what do they have? Do they have excellent memory? Do they have very excellent processing? Or they have any knowledge of any other language? No. The answer is no, right? What's going on here? So afterwards, I begin to work with those little monsters, to see what's going on. So in particular, I'm very interested in how they interpret certain kind of sentences in real context, the interaction of semantics and pragmatics in linguistics terms. So for example, suppose you, on the Halloween, you hold a bowl of candies standing in the yard and offer a kid, you can take some candies. The kid was so excited, he began to take some, and some. Then your bowl was empty now. So what would you feel at this moment? So yeah, in most cases, when you encounter the sentence, you can take some candies. So most adults will infer that, okay, you can take some, but not all the candies. But this kind of enriched meaning we call implicators will be hard for young kids in certain contexts. So I'm interested in how and when young kids can develop from those logical meaning to those enriched implicators. In particular, I look at whether children's working memory can really reliably predict their performance, and whether when we free up some cognitive processing resources for them, whether their performance will improve. And moreover, I wanted to see in what kind of case adults will change their behavior and begin to behave like kids. So when we give them more processing burdens, do you think they will change their behavior? So besides the role of cognition, I'm also very interested in the role of grammar, in children's language development. For example, whether children can really perceive some prosodic cues when they interpret those sentences, you can take some candies, or you can take some candies, okay? So I'm wondering whether those prosodic stress can really give influence to children's interpretation. And also I'm wondering whether different structures will play a role. You can take some candies, or you can take some of the candies. So whether the different structures will play a role here. And also I'm wondering children acquiring different languages like English, Mandarin Chinese, or even different modality like American Sign Language, whether they can show different patterns here or not. So the understanding of the first language development, the language of typically developing children will be very important for the understanding of human language and also human cognition. In
addition, it will be very essential for us to analyze and understand of the language of atypically developing children, and also the adults who suffer from language loss due to some diseases or injuries. So that's my floor. Bye-bye.
All right, let's give everyone one more round of applause. Really well done. So thank you all for coming. I see a really nice mix of graduate students and faculty members, so it's really wonderful to see all of you support the postdocs and to learn from them. And I hope that those of you who are attending on Zoom follow up via email and ask them lots of juicy questions that you don't get to ask at the reception. So if you are not familiar with the building, we don't want you getting lost like Xian did. Just follow the crowd, but you'll go, Carol, you can do this better than I can, but go out the door and just down the hall. If you leave something here and you want to go back, the other way you can go is outside of the building. No, just kidding. So please join us at the reception so you can get some nice sweet treats and some coffee and some water. And let's give them one more round of applause.